Hello and welcome to another video, and I wanted to take the time and do a complete review of The Penguin. Now that the entire series is out, the entire series is fully available to stream on Max, and again, highly encourage you to watch it if you haven't watched it. Even if you haven't watched The Batman, the movie that preceded this, I still think it's worth dropping into. I mean, there is at the beginning, there is a major event that happens during the Batman that this immediately follows, but you will get the gist of it within the first 5 minutes of the series. So, well, it's not essential viewing to see the Batman. I do highly encourage people to watch that movie before watching the Penguin, but one of the biggest reasons I want to review it is this show. Like, I don't use the term masterpiece very often, but this is a fucking masterpiece of a television show. It's easily the best thing that HBO has produced, I think, since True Detective. I know some people are going to throw in the argument of Game of Thrones, which Game of Thrones I would put in that category if the last season didn't happen. But every piece of this was just incredible. Like, every single episode had me hooked to it. Is there a couple different things that I could nitpick and maybe, whine about being a massive Batman fan? Absolutely. But to get such a well drawn out adult, well written, basically origin story for a villain, because it is the story of kind of his rise to being at the top of the ranks in Gotham's underworld. Fantastic. Like, it was like I knew going into it, like we saw his performance in the Batman. Obviously his scenes, there's not a lot of it because he's definitely not the main villain of the Batman. That was the Riddler. But he definitely, every scene he was in, he stole 100%. But it was one of those things where, like, man, I'd really like to see more of this character explored. So when they announced that, hey, we're gonna do this this thing, I was shocked and thought, well, there's an opportunity to really do something good here, especially considering, like, in the terms of TV and Batman, it's not really worked out too well up to this point. Yes, I did watch Gotham. I give Gotham somewhat of a pass because I do have a soft spot for certain things that were done on that show. And I do think that show did some villains very, very well. And it did other villains very, very terrible. So that show kind of comes off as a mixed bag of a TV show. I never watched that Pennyworth show, so I have nothing to say on that. I never cared, and it's also on like a very weird channel that's kind of hard to acquire that show. So this is kind of one of the biggest things that we've seen come along in terms of live action Batman. Obviously there's animated series, stuff like that, which that's a little bit different than a live action thing. But one of my first questions sitting down watching the first episode of the show was, how adult is this going to be being an HBO show? This is a spin-off of a PG-13 rated movie. Are they going to go for the adult R rating here? They 100% do. It's violent, it's dark, it's gritty. There's a lot of language that you would expect, and it really gets into the territory of like mob story, which I really appreciate. It's something I think that's really missing on TV right now. As someone who's a massive fan of The Sopranos, even stuff like Sons of Anarchy and The Shield, those were great shows as well, but I don't feel like there's really like an epic like crime type show from this perspective really that's on TV right now that's as captivating as this was for its 8 episodes. That's one of the other things I will say here, where I know that a lot of people are like, I really want a second season of this, or I want more of this. I personally don't. I think by doing another season of this show, you risk spoiling a good thing. I think that this show, as a contained miniseries, is it perfectly begins, it perfectly ends. And I think bringing this character where he is now into the next Batman movie makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of rumors going around out there that they're going to do the same thing for this version of the Joker with the TV show, which I think is a smarter idea, because something like that can maybe erase from everyone's minds Joker Folie à Deux, because I think everybody wants to forget that fucking pile of garbage. So that would be awesome. And I think from the very little bit that we saw that actor's, I can't pronounce his name, Barry something, we saw that actor's portrayal of Joker in the Batman, and then there was that deleted scene, which I really feel like it shouldn't have been deleted. I think there are other scenes in that movie you could have cut. I really like the direction that guy's taking the Joker, something completely different, which I think for a character that's as popular as the Joker, I think that's really smart and inventive. You have to do something different to get people's attention with that character at this point. The other thing, like things I want to highlight about this show, is that not only is it a show that, you know, really elevates the character of the Penguin in a way that we just haven't seen before. I saw a meme floating around where, you know, they have the different live action penguins, you know, from the 60s live action show, Danny DeVito, and then this, and it's just like, we've never had a bad penguin in live action. Like, I 100% agree, we never have. And I think this was just fantastic. I also think the guy that did the Penguin in Gotham was really good as well. Other characters in the show I want to highlight. The other thing that they did is such a tremendous job of, that I think was also the real like scene stealer of this 8-episode miniseries, specifically was doing the character of Sophia Falcone. I knew going into it that they were going to kind of heavily place her into it, and well, it doesn't follow the stories from the comics directly. It pulls elements from it, like the whole Hangman thing. It does its own thing with it, which is really well done, well written here, and that's the biggest thing I want to highlight. Is these people sat down, they wrote these scripts like actual characters, and you could get into the characters and invested in this, which is something I feel that is lost a lot of times in modern television. And this show really did just an outstanding job of getting you connected to some of these characters. Her story is incredibly fascinating too, the way that she's able to, you know, kind of come from where she is. And I'm talking around a lot of events in this show because I don't want to talk about spoilers just yet. I will mention spoilers at the end of this, but to where she kind of ends up, it is it's an incredible story. And then of course we also have the character of Victor, who you know, starts out as just a kid trying to steal tires off Penguin's car, and then you know, transforms into basically his sidekick for the show. A fascinating character that they did a good job of telling his backstory as well, and really getting you to connect to these characters. It's just every minute of like tremendous. There are things that I can nitpick about the show for sure. I'm not going to put this in spoiler territory because I really don't feel it's spoiler at this point, but I think for people like me was expecting like, hey man, maybe we get a shot of Batman. You know, I didn't even need it necessarily to be Robert Pattinson showing up, but if we would have gotten a shot of like him swinging across a rooftop or something, or even like a back shot of him or something, there's nothing. And it's weird because there are certain things that happen throughout this show where you're like, Batman would probably come and fucking investigate this shit. I don't think he's sitting this out, you know. And I know that Matt Reeves, the director and kind of the person behind all this stuff with this universe, has come out and said like, he's busy doing other shit because of what happened with the explosion and the water and everything going underwater in Gotham. And like, that's, to me, it's kind of a weak response, because there is something that happens towards the end of this show that I think is big enough that would have Batman come and investigate it. So it's kind of like, it was a head scratcher. The other thing that's weird about it is up until the very end, there's never really much mention of other characters from the movie. It almost feels like its own self-contained thing, to the point that you forget that this is Gotham City. I don't necessarily dislike that about the show, but I didn't like it either at the same time, because I wanted some elements of it to be there as well. But I like that this version of Gotham City also still really feels like a lived-in city, and it does retain some of that kind of like gothic imagery that we think of when we think of Gotham City. Whereas like if you compare it to something like the Nolan movies, it just looks like fucking Chicago, because it was Chicago that they shot in. Or for Dark Knight Rises, it was Philadelphia. But that's where I kind of want to put a pin in like the non-spoiler stuff. It's a fantastic show. I would give it a 10 out of 10. I know I'm biased because I'm a huge Batman fan, but I really will honestly sit here, like, even taking being a Batman fan outside of this, I think there's something that anyone can get out of this show. I think it's worth anyone's time to watch this thing. As far as spoilers, and I'll put a spoiler mark here, obviously we've got to talk about a few things that happen in this show that are a little fucking weird. So the one thing I alluded to is, like, at the end of the 7th episode, the second to last episode, there's a giant explosion that like levels an entire city block. And I know it's not the same impact as what happened at the end of the Batman movie, where, you know, obviously half the city's underwater, but it's still a thing where it's like you leveled an entire city block. I think Batman would come fucking check that out. So I had a hard time with that part, like that specifically in this show. Another thing that really bothered me at the very, very tail end. So, and this is, again, heavy spoiler for the show. So when you get to the very end of this show and you've kind of had this, like, you know, cat mouse game between Penguin and Sovia, when they get to the very end, and, you know, he basically has her cornered. She thinks that he's going to shoot her in the back, but the cops come and take her away. She comes back to Arkham. Earlier on in the show, she had a psychiatrist when she was originally in Arkham that leaves with her. Like, he leaves and quits and then comes, and he's basically like one of her henchmen. The problem I had was at the end of this show, she goes back to Arkham, and this dude just all of a sudden shows up as her fucking doctor again, and he was just allowed to come back in and, you know, be her psychiatrist again. That just doesn't seem, for a show that's so well written, that seemed really poorly written at the end, because it just doesn't make sense that they would accept that guy to come back after everything that's happened. But I did like that at the very end she does get a letter from Selina Kyle, which would technically be her half sister in this universe. Really, really cool. So it teases something that they'll probably do in the sequel for this movie. And again, her character on this show and that actress was the breakout of this show, and that's one of the most impressive things I can say for a show that has, like, I'll be stunned if Colin Farrell doesn't win an Emmy for this thing, because his performance is so magnificent. But when you have a performance that big and that large as life, to stand out above that performance is really, truly something. And I think that actress did, which is the other thing that really elevates this show to the next level. The other thing that I really liked about it, I do have a caveat with this, and again, heavy spoiler for the show. The very end of the show, you know, again, you're not supposed to like the Penguin. Like, he's not a good guy. And this show does a lot of stuff to make you be on his side. And make you kind of care for the character, obviously. But at the very end, he has kind of, you know, one of those heel turn moments where, as he's sitting on, you know, a bench with Victor, who again has been with him through this entire show, he ends up fucking killing him. And I know that's a move that's going to get a mixed reaction from the audience of the show, although I think most people in reactions I've read have been very positive. But I thought that was a masterful move, because again, it still proves, like, you're not supposed to be rooting for this guy. He's not a good guy. And especially when they give you the backstory about what he did as a child, it's not shocking what he does here to Victor. My complaint about that scene is, I think the way in which he kills him, which is he kind of chokes him out and takes too fucking long. I think that ruins the impact of it. I think it would have been more shocking, and I understand why they don't do it, because obviously it would have made a lot of noise, but I think it would have been more shocking if he pulled out a gun and just shot him. Because it would have been a split second, and you would be like, oh shit, you know. And there are other moments on that show where that happens to characters, where, like, they're here 1 minute and then bam, they're dead. I think that would have been more impactful, or at the very least, he could have stabbed him or something. I think that would have shown more of an impact to that character's death. But this slow, like, choke out scene, it goes on a little too long, and it's like, all right, I get it, he's gonna kill him. But holy shit, man, what a master stroke of a show. And especially in a time where I feel like a lot of times I have a hard time getting into different TV series right now, because I look at it and go, I don't know if I really care to get into some, you know, 8-season thing. This one really, you know, 8 episodes, each one's an hour long. Great miniseries. Highly recommend it. 10 out of 10. Again, I don't use the term masterpiece very often, but I have to say 100%. The show is a masterpiece. So highly recommended. I'm going to leave it at that. You guys can leave your thoughts below. Be civil in the comments. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And as always, until next time.